All right. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you guys all here. We had a few technical glitches in the back end, but I'm glad to see you all this morning. Welcome to MakerBot Chats. As always, my name is Felipe. Here, creative director with MakerBot, and yeah, today we have a good one. It's kind of a follow-up of last week's. We will be talking about loading third-party materials with the method, specifically. How do you actually load them? How do you use any type of third-party material with your printer, and the process for loading the filament, loading the extruder. In this case, as you guys might know, the labs extruder, which is what we use to power the printer with third-party materials, right? And I'm just confirming that everything is working on the back end. See that you guys get the proper stream key. Yeah, seems to be working now. All right, so as I was saying, Alejandra is also on the back end. She'll be gathering all of your guys' questions. If you have any questions, do post them in that chat section. We will be actually looking at that, as we go through, and we'll try to answer as many as we can throughout the episode. Let's start with here we go. Let's start with the site itself, right? Last year we introduced, which is almost last week, it's like 3 weeks ago, but anyways, we introduced about 24 materials for the method. Well, the method series, so that includes method and method X. And let's see. And now, what out of those 24 materials, many of them are what we call our labs materials, right? Or they come with our labs platform. What that means is that they are dedicated materials that you can use, well, not dedicated, but materials that you should use with the labs extruder, right? It's a third-party material, so all of these that you see highlighted on the right-hand lower quadrant, CEVs, PEGI ESE, PEGI carbon fiber, DuraBio, Polymax, Polymax FR, Polylite, PCPVT, all of those from Polymaker, ABS Kevlar, ABS ESE, ABS EC, and ABS carbon fiber, right? All of those are not MakerBot materials. They are third-party materials, whether that be supplied by Kimia, by Polymaker, by Jabil, and a few other, Mitsubishi Chemical even, a few other manufacturers, right? But you will need to use the labs extruder in order to print with them. Why? Well, the labs extruder essentially allows you to print with any third-party material. It doesn't have to be only these 12 materials, right? You can actually use any material that it's 1.75 millimeters in diameter. And what I'll be covering today is actually how do you load those materials into the printer. We will be using the Aux port in the printer, which is located on the right-hand side. I actually have here, if I switch over to this view, I have an additional view of the printer right here, right? There is an extra port in the printer that allows you to actually sort of side load any third-party materials that you would like to use. So that's what we'll be covering today. And yeah, if you have any specific questions about any one of these materials, I think that it's quite a handful of them. As I was saying, there's anything from composites, with the Kevlar ABS and the ABS carbon fiber, to very interesting ones like the flexible one, specifically CEVs or SEVS. I don't know how do you guys know it. It's essentially similar to a TPU. I like it much better. It's a little bit more stable, and especially the layer addition, it's much better than TPU. But yeah, if you have also specific questions around any one of these materials, do send them out in the labs section. In the chat section. So we'll get started, right? First of all, you will need to unload, once you have your labs extruder, right, you will need to unload your current extruder. In this case, I've got ABS loaded here in my printer. Let me switch my view so that you guys can see. I'll go ahead and unload my ABS. That's going to trigger basically my heating process in the extruder. It's going to take about, I would say, like 30 seconds to go all the way to 245 degrees Celsius, right? It'll depend on the material that you have loaded. Some materials are like carbon fiber have a higher melting temperature, so it'll take a few seconds more. But in any case, what the machine is doing right now is just heating itself up, or specifically the extruder, in order to offload the current material. In this case is the ABS. The ABS is loaded, and I'll try to move this down a little bit. Let's see. Just adjusting my view here. So my ABS is actually loaded here in my drawer. I can open and close this drawer throughout the process. It doesn't really matter. But since, as we've discussed before, it's important to keep materials fairly dry, right? So I would say try to keep these drawers closed most of the time. Only open them when you are actually loading and offloading the filament, or unloading the filament, sorry. Because that'll just keep your materials pristine and in good shape for longer, right? So as I was saying, the extruder is heating up. Right now it's about 220 degrees Celsius, 230. It heats up rather fast, right? So that's one of the cool things about Method. It's actually, you don't have to wait that long for your material to load. Well, actually for your extruders to heat up. And there we go. Now it says unloading. The material is backing out of the extruder. Please wait. So in a second, you might hear, let's see. There we go. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a very light reverse motor sound. So basically the stepper motors that actually pulling the material out and pushing it back into the bay. It's not going to push it back entirely, right? With the loading process, the loading is completely automated, right? So it routes, it pulls it from the drawer all the way to the extruder. For the unloading process, once it removes like the first tip of the filament from the extruder, you will actually have to rewind the spool like so. So you can see here, right? I can just pull the material slightly. You might feel a little bit of extra tension for the first kind of turn. And then I can go ahead and just turn the spool all the way. This is, as I said, unlike the loading process, which is fully automated, with the unloading, the process is actually manual. You have to manually pull the filament out, right? And once I'm done pulling my filament out, let me just store it properly. Here we go. Placing the tip in one of these little nifty teeth that actually help clip the tip of the material. I can just close that up. And for this, you know, I will store my material here. This is ABS. ABS is not that sensitive to humidity. If you're storing your material for, let's say, a weekend, maybe even a week, it's okay to store it in the drawer. If it's going to be longer than that, I would say take your material out and put it on a Mylar bag or on a properly dry space, because, you know, humidity definitely can damage your material. I know that I've said that a lot, but it's true, and it's impressive how much of a difference it can make sometimes. Now, I'm going to get started in the, you know, removing my extruder. So just changing my camera view here a little bit. Here we go. All right. Opening the printer up and revealing my two extruders right here, right? So you can see how the actual 1XA extruder, or my model material extruder, is actually glowing red. That means that it's hot right now. So I can wait, but you know, it doesn't take that long for it to cool down. I'll just start removing the swivel clip, opening up here my latch. The latch actually keeps that extruder firmly in place. Opening the latch and removing my extruder, right? As long as I don't touch the tip, I should be fine. It's not going to be completely, you know, super hot, even though it heats up really fast. It also cools down fairly fast. I wouldn't touch the tip, you know, make sure to avoid that. But as long as you're touching the plastic elements on the extruder, you should be fine, like to remove it immediately. I'll just put this guy to the side. And before I load my labs extruder, which I have here, or actually, I'll load the extruder already. Like, I'll just put it in there, dropping it here on the extruder bay, right? Closing the latch, securing it, and adding my swivel clip, basically my material routing into the extruder. I'll just put my lid on just for a second. And since, you know, a couple of things to note, since I've just actually changed extruders, the printer is asking me, and I'll move you guys here a little bit. The printer is asking me to calibrate my machine right now, right? So every time that I change extruders, it's going to actually ask me to recalibrate them just to make sure that the extruders are properly aligned and the printer knows the specific difference between the nozzles. What that's going to guarantee in turn is actually, you know, better accuracy, better parts, and yeah, essentially more, you know, a higher success rate. I'll come back to the printer in a second and to the loading process, but before exposing the, you know, let me switch back here. Before exposing the Aux port, I want to show you one of the parts that we actually released in Thingiverse that allows you to use third-party material. This is actually a downloadable part. It's a spool holder designed by one of our industrial designers, Quincy Kwang, and the design team, so shout out to him. But it essentially allows you to side mount you know, a third-party spool. You can find that, and I'll show you guys, you know, how it looks here. So you can find this part in Thingiverse. It's thing 4258719 if you want like the specific URL, or you can also just go to Thingiverse. Here we go. And go to our labs group. So if you look for Thingiverse groups, then MakerBot Labs, and within MakerBot Labs, that's actually, you know, a good reference for you guys to have. Anybody who's using labs right now should, you know, could benefit from that. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, I'm right. Could benefit from that group. But essentially in that group, we are hosting everything from interesting material profiles, interesting resources for you to use if you're using the Labs extruder, both for the legacy one for the you know, for the Rep Plus, or the new one for the Method and the Method X. And that is specifically where you will find this spool mount for MakerBot Labs, right? That's where you will download these files. And let me go back here to my camera. Here we go. The files for this guy. Why is this guy important and relevant? Well, it's because it's allowing you to actually side mount the material, the third-party material, much more easily. And it's relying on a really interesting feature of the Method, right? So as many of you guys know, some printers allow for third-party materials to be loaded. That's not the exception with Method. And the Aux port is actually located here to the side. Let me move the camera higher up. It's located to the side of the printer. So just looking at this at the left-hand side of the printer, when looking at it, when looking the printer from the front, you'll see this little door, right? Or latch hatch. Removing that door, it's just, this guy is just clipped in. Will reveal these two ports, Aux 1 and Aux 2. Those are the auxiliary ports for both the support and model material, right? And what we're going to do right now is actually take this file. Well, I'll start by putting just the material, the printed element in, right? So I'll go ahead and put the guide tube in first to Aux 1, right? And then the file has, let me show you, the file actually has a really nice little detail here that basically allows you to clip it in on that small punch or hole that the printer already has. So I can just go ahead and place the guide tube in first. That's very important because sometimes it can be a little bit harder to do it afterwards. And then clip my side mount to the side of the printer. I'll rotate the camera a little bit for you guys to see a little bit better. So I'll repeat that process once more. But essentially, we got the guide tube, placing it in on the Aux 1 port, and then just nesting the attachment, the latch itself, onto the side of the printer. And now I'm ready to actually place my material in there, just as I would with any other sort of external caddy, and route the first tip of my filament through all the way. I'll open this guy up again, but all the way into my last extruder. Now here you might want to, just to make sure, since you're routing it manually, you might want to make sure that the filament is going through like so, just exposing a little bit an extra tip of the material, right? And then guiding it directly into the extruder itself, right? There we go, placing my swivel clip again. And, the last step right now is going to actually go ahead and hit load in my printer so that I can actually see my material come out of it. So I'll go ahead and here, since my material is already making direct connection with the extruder, it's detecting as it was already loaded. So I'm going to hit, instead of load, I'm going to hit purge here, my printer. Now it's asking me for, here, let me change my camera here. it's asking me for the actual temperature that I'll be using. Since this is a polycarbonate and I know that it's actually running in at 255 degrees Celsius, I just select here that there's a really nice scrolling animation happening here. Select 255 degrees Celsius, hit load, and wait for the material to, for the extruder to start loading, right? It's going to go all the way from room temperature to 255, and once that happens, the material is going to start flowing freely through the printer. As you can see here in my second view, right, now my extruder, it's actually, it's actually red. It's letting me know that it's heating up, and I'm just waiting for a few seconds for that process to happen. Regularly, when using your material base, right, the filament is, automatically routed into your extruder. In this case, since you're side loading it, you're actually bypassing a few of the sensors that the printer has in. So that's why I think it's really important to just manually push the material instead of waiting for the printer to just automatically detect it. Once you start playing with it, I'm sure you'll see the benefit behind it. Now it's at 210 degrees Celsius. It's missing about 40 degrees. Just give it a few more seconds. And that's another really thing, for me, impressive thing to note. I've used other platforms in the past, not only MakerBots, but other brands as well. The heating process can take a lot of time, right? Even just the extruders, just swapping filaments. And you've seen me do it right now a few times already. So it's about, I don't know, I reckon like 3, maybe 5 minutes for the whole process to be completed. So right now my material is being pulled. As you can see, the side mount and the spool itself starts to move, as the material is being routed. And since now it's actually flowing freely, I'll go ahead and change my view here for you guys to see how the material starts to come out of my printer. Let's see. One thing that's important to note, and I'll just place the camera here, but one thing really important to note here is that as my material starts flowing out of my extruder, right, you'll see that this color is not the white color that my material actually has on my spool, right? So there's this kind of grayish color coming out. The reason for that, and that's one of the things that we've talked about here in the past, the reason for that is that I was actually using ABS Kevlar before running this material in this particular extruder, right? So there's a little bit of a, contamination happening here in the extruders, and that's why I really recommend having dedicated extruders for each materials. If you're just running it, running a quick print, it might be fine, but you really want to make sure that your filament is actually completely running cleanly and free and without the presence of any additional filament in there. If you have to use one extruder, one lapse extruder, and toggle between different materials, what I would recommend is doing a few runs of the purging process just to make sure that the filament is actually coming out, clean and pristine. In this case, it's a little bit easier because I have white polycarbonate coming out, so I can wait until the filament coming out of my extruder is completely white to know that my extruder is now clean. If I was using two black materials, let's say I was jumping between ABS carbon fiber and Kevlar carbon fiber, it's going to be a little bit trickier. But if you complete at least 2 cycles of the purging process, you should be fine, for that. But yeah, it's really important, and you'll see, like in a second, I'll just bring closer the little blobs of filament coming out. But you can see how the initial blob right here was rather grayish, right? Almost, dark gray. Let's see if the camera will focus on it. And then, the later ones, it's the material progressively gets whiter, clearer, and in that, much better and completely sort of pristine polycarbonate for me to print with and use the material in a successful way. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that from my extruder, close my printer up, confirm that the process has been completed here, and that's it. That's all it takes for you to actually change filament, change the extruder, and yeah, actually get to use third-party materials on the MakerBot method. I'll go ahead and place my camera back here on my caddy for you guys to see, and I'm going to jump into some of your guys' questions. As always, let us know if you have any specific comments. You can either comment on the right-hand side of the YouTube window, or send them, any questions that you might have to hello@MakerBot, or Felipe, that's Felipe at MakerBot, for us to answer. But let's see. What's the best application for the Kevlar material? Kevlar, we did a few webinars last year around Kevlar. I would say that generally speaking, you'll want to use it for applications that need to withstand compression forces, not so much for tension, right? We actually did a test, tension test, comparing ABS Kevlar with nylon carbon fiber, and nylon carbon fiber is just much better. However, if you're pressing your parts together, it's going to perform much better for that type of application. If you think about, a press, bench press, or something that needs to withstand compressive forces, that's where Kevlar will actually shine. What support material is used for SEPs? SEPs actually can work with, actually works with PVA, right? Yeah, you just use our water-soluble PVA. That's a material that's dedicated for SEPs. I would say also, if you try to use breakaway supports, it also works really well, but yeah, SEPs is an amazing material to play with. If I leave my filament loaded inside of the printer for an extended period of time, will my prints or extruder get compromised? If I loaded, well, okay, I'll repeat that question once more. If I leave my filament loaded inside the printer for an extended period of time, will my printers or extruder get compromised? No, but I would say if you're leaving your printer idle for more than a week, do consider putting your filament in a Mylar bag instead, just because that will keep your material much drier and in a better state for you to use. The extruder will not have any issues, but the material, depending on the material, can soak up some moisture and then degrade over time. Have you used any IGUS material? No, actually no. Let me look that up. IGUS filament. Is that similar to TPU, I wonder? Oh, so it's a supplier itself. Oh, interesting. No, I've never used it. Filament for 3D printing, never used IGUS, but it's an interesting one to note. If I ever use it, I'll let you guys know. How do I clean my 3D printer after printing? Any post-printing cleaning best practices? I would say just make sure that any leftover material in your build plate is actually gone. That, as I was saying, if you're planning on using a different material, maybe unload the extruder and use a different one. Just make sure that your materials are not kept forever in that drawer bay without being used. I think that's the most basic advice that I can give. And maybe clean up the nozzles. Sometimes there's a little bit of a leftover kind of excess filament dripping from the nozzles. If you want to do that, that's also good, so that you can start with a clean slate for the next print. How often should I replace my 3D printer nozzle? That's not often. I haven't had to do it before in the method, right? It actually takes a long time for you to damage those nozzles. They are stainless steel nozzles, so they will last quite a long time. If you have to do it, maybe every 6 months, but not out of where it's going to be, if you get a clog, if you're using any sort of weird material that just collects itself in the nozzle, then maybe. But yeah, how can I tell if a nozzle is clogged? Okay, so this is related, and how to unclog it. Depending on how your material is flowing, right? When you're running through the purge sequence, you'll want to see the material flowing nice and smooth and clean. And you'll want to see a single bit of material, right? As you saw right now, when I was actually purging the material, it started collecting a little bit on the tip of my nozzle. If you see that happening a lot, that might be a sign that your nozzle is starting to clog a little bit. And I would say that might be also related to jumping back and forth between materials. So you will want to make sure that you give it a good chance at cleaning itself, maybe running a few purging sequences just to make sure that the extruder doesn't collect any more material as you switch back and forth between materials. Is it possible to change a filament in the middle of a print? Yes, it is. It's not recommended because many of the print profiles are actually associated to, well, not actually, they are associated to to the filament. And that might not work well between different materials. What I mean, if you start a slice with ABS and then want to switch over to a TPU or SEBS, you might compromise your print just because SEBS or any TPU will have a different print profile. The machine will run at a different speed than when using ABS. So since the machine doesn't know that that change just happened, you will probably have less poor results on your prints themselves. Can I use alcohol to clean the print head? I wouldn't recommend using alcohol. Actually the method comes, and let me show you, that's, I'll cap it with that. But if I move my camera here and show you guys the extruder tips again, so here, right? Bringing you guys a little bit closer to the action. Here we go. All right, so Method actually comes with this really nice metal brush. Well, nice in that it's really practical, right? But it's basically a metallic brush. I think that this is stainless steel little strings. But that's all that you need, Essentially, you're just like brushing the teeth of the nozzle, the tips of the nozzle like so. You'll want to do it in different directions, so left to right, right to left, front to back, just to make sure. And actually, is there? Yeah, I can show you. If you see, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but you'll see how the nozzles change over time as I start brushing them with the brush, right? That's all you need. You don't need to add any sort of substrate, any sort of cleaning agent. It's better to maybe, if you want to clean the nozzles, you can run the cleaning nozzle sequence in the UI itself, and all that's going to do is actually warm up your nozzles for you to have an easier time brushing them. But it's only a mechanical cleaning up. There's no need for a chemical cleanup to happen, right? So yeah, let me know if you have any more questions about that. I think that's an interesting subject, in just how to keep, we keep hearing this a lot, how to keep your print heads clean and good. But yeah, with that, I'll thank you guys all for joining us today. As I said before, hello at MakerBot, Felipe at MakerBot, or at MakerBot in either one of our social accounts, whether that's Instagram or Twitter. And we'll be happy to answer any more questions. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys hopefully next week. We have a good announcement for next week. And yeah, happy printing for now. Bye.